All right. So thanks everyone for coming to listen to me today. I know there's a lot of great talks to choose from. So my name is Stephany Spencer, and I've been working at USA Today Network for about a little under a year. So, and before this job, I took like a semi-hiatus, and I was working in university land. And so since joining USA Today, I've spent the last year learning how to be a Kubernetes admin. And so this is a topic that's really dear to my heart, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about, mostly because I've gone through the process. Now I wanted to remind everybody that this is a birds of a feather, so really I'm hoping to have a discussion, because while I have ideas on how we could do things better, I know everybody else has gone through their own trials about how can we both train up our own developers, our own KubeAdmins, because you can't go out there and hire people that are trained on all this already, so it's now on us to build out that group. So I'll just do a little quick introduction to who we are. So USA Today Network comprises of both USA Today and over 100 local newspapers. We run all of those digital presences on GKE. And over the past year, we've migrated from numerous small Kubernetes clusters to multiple large Kubernetes clusters. And we split up we run multi-tenant clusters across 25 plus different developer groups, like over 300 developers. For those that are curious, we do our multi-tenant based on namespace level and sometimes even dedicated node pools. No, because I closed them out and forgot to save them right before this, so we're gonna wing it. Yep, I had something, but no, not now. So we will have a microphone that we could come over and talk about ideas, so please feel free, jump in, add to the conversation. This is a discussion. So I was gonna first start and talk a little bit about how we did ours, how I have gone through. Let's see if this is coming up. There we go. Now let me get that on the screen. Oh, sorry, give me 1 second. While I figure this out. So we began, when I started, we had a little bit of an outline for what people can do working with Kubernetes. We had some basic labs that said, all right, you are a developer, you're a new hire. What you want to do is go through these labs to figure out how of our pieces all work together. Now that was great, except the labs were really focused on this is our technology. And not really on why would you want to use that. Oh, here we go. Let me go over here. Sorry, now I have to find a mouse. Scroll down. Come on, mouse. All right. And this is what we begin all of our developers on, is this like platform labs page where we walk through a lot of the technologies that we have available to everybody. But in particular, over the past year, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what we do and how do we onboard people. So we began our own set of labs for moving developers off of existing clusters onto GKE. And we have a really wide range of people. I'm talking about not just our new hires within our group, our cloud engineers, but we also need to have a certain level of expertise in all of the developers out there. And while they may not need the same ultimate depth, the steps are still much the same for the first part. So what we've come up with is a process where we go through and break out the various pieces, and we try to make it so that everything builds on each other. So the basics, how do you connect to the cluster? What is a container registry? Let's get started. And on through using Helm and accessing your secrets and so forth. Now this has worked, well, I'd say better than the previous system in that we've tried to broaden it so that it was accessible to more people without coming in, without having all that background knowledge. Because as you're probably aware, Kubernetes is hard. It's a big ecosystem. There's a lot of parts. And when I started, I just, I did the Kubernetes the hard way. I watched the videos, and I'm like, I don't know what all these pieces are. And I would like, sorry, I got distracted on that. What I'd like to hear are some ideas about how can we break this down and make this more accessible to to our developers, to the folks that just need to use Kubernetes. They just need to run their applications. And by following that path, we can build up that expertise. So my first question, if I had my slides that I would like to hear back, is ideas on how to present the Kubernetes ecosystem to folks. Usually everybody starts with that big chart of here's Kubernetes, here's your controllers and your master etcd and so forth, but that's too much. So my first question is, anybody found a good way to break that down outside of the Fippy books? I mean, they're great and all, don't get me wrong, I have some little stuffed animals around here too. But open the floor to ideas on how to introduce Kubernetes without overwhelming. Or to shout it out if he doesn't.
Maybe arranging docs around some personas. Not everybody needs the same things out of Kubernetes. There's a very system admin manage the bare metal kind of Kubernetes maintainers, and there's the developers that may not even need to touch Kubernetes much more than push stuff into Git repository and know a little bit about it's going to launch a chart for you or something. And then there's like packagers that might build Helm charts, and maybe try to sort the documentation into what the person's role is going to be might help.
Several different tracks is kind of what you're thinking.
Sorry. Just to play on that, in general documentation, if we're breaking things and documentations into personas at other companies that I've been at, actually getting people who are within that ecosystem of persona to help write in that documentation and building out lab work as you're doing it has really helped focus of like where your assumptions lie.
So taking an example from a real application and walking it through. So it, okay.
So when it came to the engineers and having them get things online and actually working in Kubernetes, what we did is we built a skeleton of the deployment YAML, or the YAML files and the service files and all those things. We presented those, but then in a group presentation, we actually just started a Hello World application and worked through the Hello World application, the networking and all of that. And it kind of demystified a lot of the things that they were worried about. So we took the approach of show them what they need to do to get their applications up, and then allow them to come to us and ask questions later. And we presented documentation. That definitely got rid of some of the ghosts and some of the fear when it came to presenting to the engineers.
What level did you start with? I mean, did you start with helping them build containers, or did you?
They were already building the containers locally. They were already in Docker, so they already understood Docker and all of that. So we were luckily We didn't have to, kind of start there. It was more just presenting the actual Kubernetes piece to them and showing them how you put it in the registry, and then the Kubernetes will go in and pull from the registry the Docker image and then deploy that way.
Kind of on a need-to-know basis, just kind of titrate the information out to them as they go along?
Yeah, because we didn't want to oversaturate them. We were afraid of scaring them with too much information. And it actually worked out really well. They latched on and learned pretty quickly that way. It was about us being available was the biggest piece.
I'd like to add on to that a little bit. Wow, that was loud. Pairing works really well for that. Like once you've kind of got them to a base level, then you start pairing with them to get them actually into the real environment, and that can actually, I found that to be really helpful in getting people up to speed as well.
And once you paired with them, were they able to stand on their own, or did they still need a lot of hand-holding from that point?
It depended on the person, but sometimes it took a couple of iterations to really have it sink in, but it made them much more confident in being able to push things into production.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about training your platform team is the complexity of just what's running within the Kubernetes ecosystem, right? The operational overhead there. And what we've done when we've had a number of people come on to our platform group, and so allowing people to lead kind of a breaking, like a destruction mission, like destroying a cluster, like taking down the API, taking down a controller, deleting pods, things like that, where they start tearing stuff apart, and then, or they get an environment where it's like, hey, this pod is crash looping or things like that, and start to go through some of the bad things that happen, and then they have to say, okay, how do I go from this piece of information through a number of things? And so creating some of those situations where it's not the happy path has been really helpful for the people who have to operate the platform.
And how did you even get them started on that? I mean, when somebody's new, I'm like, okay, here's a cluster. Where do I do? Where do I start with?
Well, this goes, I think, with pairing. It's like, well, when you're coming on for that first week, somebody's working with you, showing you some of the, like, okay, ask some questions here, and we'll try to lead you to the next, what the next API call might need to be, or what the next, kubectl command would be. But not giving that, like, say, hey, okay, once you know how to find that initial information, we're going to let you flounder a little bit, right? To give the time that it takes to really understand it, because it is a very complex ecosystem, and you got to learn a little bit by floundering and trying things out and failing. You know about get, list, watch, and once you go from there, you can at least see a lot of good information.
High degree of mentoring is what I'm hearing. A lot of just hands-on time with folks.
I've been trying to create a series of, walkthroughs where I just take like a very small piece of something that somebody might need to do, like templating, and then just have like the basic amount of stuff involved in that, and then having it something they can actually walk through and do themselves, and then peppering it with like lots of watches so that they can actually watch how the objects are interacting and created together. So if like they're creating a deployment, actually have another tab that's watching pods and watching replica sets, so they can see like how everything is like coming up together, and like kind of demystify like how all these parts work, I guess.
Hi. Okay. So my approach was I presented challenges first, like why or what we're trying to achieve, right? So.
Sorry, getting a lot of feedback. I can't quite hear you.
Put the mic like at your face like that.
Like this? Yeah. It's better? Oh. So with regards to the software deployment, right? So what challenges we're facing now? So what we're solving, right? What problem we have? And when we break from monolith to microservices, right? What does it mean for us? How we're deploying? So what we have to change and what tools we need to use for that to achieve that. and then already we kind of, breaking this to multiple pieces, like how it's designed and so on and so forth. But we have to understand why we need it to begin with.
Okay. So you spend a lot of time figuring out what the problem is first and what their customer profile is before you even start.
Not in that sense, in the sense that we have a certain way of building applications and we have another way of building applications. And this way of shipping this new way of microservices is completely different from what we knew. So that's we're introducing new tools and we go from there.
Get this guy.
See if I can do this with the speaker this close. I think a big part of getting people there with a minimum of frustration is for them to know that there is not just that there is support, but there is support whose purpose is to be that support. Not just, hey, if you have a problem, ping one of our admins in Slack and they'll get back to you when they're not doing something else. There need to be people who that is their priority is, you're our new crop of people that we're onboarding on this. We want to make sure you get onboarded. And so if you ping them, they will get back to you right away. Because that is their job, is to be your onboarding, at least for this week. It doesn't mean that you have to have somebody that's their only job, but like, hey, we're going to rotate you off, instead of doing your on-call week, you're going to be doing this week. This is your on-call week.
Do you keep like a Slack community, or are they lots of tickets, or how do you facilitate that dialogue?
I think you put as many avenues out there as you can, whether it's Slack or tickets or whatever, because different people feel more comfortable accessing that help in different ways. I mean, I personally have absolutely no problem with just dropping a Slack message and then get back to me when you see it. Some organizations, people feel more comfortable if they have a ticket they can look at and bookmark. Or an email that they can mark priority and refer back to at the beginning of the next day and say, hey, did I get an answer to that? What do I need to do next?
I'm curious if you also have those discussions in like an open Slack channel so other people can read along with the problems you're solving. Is there any information sharing between new teams and old?
Let's put it this way. In places where that is not deliberately set up, it happens anyway. So you might as well set it up deliberately with a plan and support behind it.
I had an onboarding buddy. It was basically that. We just declared somebody to be your buddy for the onboarding process. Made it easier.
So, wow, couldn't tell how loud to talk. So we've done two things, and a lot of it's already been mentioned around making sure that there's a direct channel to, from my standpoint, I'm an operations guy, so a direct channel to the operations team to really help with answering questions, especially when the development teams are first going into Kubernetes. And we ramped up very slowly. We didn't try and boil the sea. We tried to boil a small cup of water. And by doing that, we had developers start to support each other as they continued to come up and as we continued to go into speed and get more towards not boiling the ocean, but now we're boiling large buckets of water, I guess. And that's being done because, and we're able to handle it because the other developers have learned how the Kubernetes ecosystem works, and so now they're helping out. They're actually in our operations channel. We have an internal Slack-like tool, so the developers actually sit on the same channel that we do. They answer questions if we don't get around to it, or if we don't respond quickly enough. In a lot of cases, they do. We actually, when we started out, I had a saying of, Kubernetes isn't broken. Every time any developer came to me and said it's not working, I always said, Kubernetes isn't broken. Let's dive in and try and see where the actual problem is. And so now I have other devs saying Kubernetes isn't broken, which is really kind of cool. And then the one other thing I was going to offer is from an administrator side, which is really where I am. I'm not a developer. I run the platform itself. But the way that I learned to operate the platform really well was by taking the tools that we use to manage other things and moving them into Kubernetes. So all the different tools that we had that were hosted on various other servers, we containerized them, so I learned how Docker worked. And then we took and we moved those into Kubernetes, so now I understand how Kubernetes hosts those things, and we've actually been able to get a lot of value out of that, not only for training the rest of the team on how to use Kubernetes, but all of our stuff is actually much more reliable now. It's a little bit easier for us to maintain because operations is using Kubernetes. It's not just the stuff that makes the company money, it's the underlying platform and how we keep that platform running.
Did that help when you were doing it that way? Did it help identify what those little cups of water were going to be, since you went through exactly the same process you're trying to teach others? Or did that inform it? Or did you just kind of go into it with an idea of how you're going to categorize it first and then make yourself run through it? Just which came first?
Actually, the development teams, somebody much smarter than I decided which applications that make our company money were going to go into Kubernetes first. So we were able to find that small application that a good, highly skilled development team could work with, learn how to do it, and then we could start learning on what problems we might have as we rolled it out into Kubernetes and how we would scale it, things of that nature. But what I learned from doing that, or what I learned as we were going through that, is I needed to, personally as the operator, I needed to understand more how the entire platform would work. So I started trying to anticipate what thing are they going to try and use next. Let me go try and use that first, so that when the development team comes to me and says, I want to use scheduled tasks or cron jobs or whatever they call them nowadays, I've already used it. I learned how it worked when it was in pre-alpha, and I understand how it works so that I can help the development teams do that. And again, we built on top of that, so we tried to stay a little bit ahead of the development teams on the features, certainly not the same scale they would use them, but from a technical perspective.
It sounds like a pretty tight relationship between the teams then.
So one of the practices that our team found to be really effective for not just onboarding new people, but also for educating people who'd been around but didn't quite know all the different pieces that went into our platform, was just the idea of going the agile route of saying we're going to have a demo day regularly where we take everything that we've been working on and you're going to show it off to everybody. And at first it started out with just innocuous things like people were demo out of a terminal session and they'd be like, oh hey, well how'd you open this other terminal and run a couple commands, like that's a fancy script you have there. And then it blossomed into more things like just learning about various pieces of the Kubernetes stack that we had built and how they function together. And we found that piqued people's interest while still keeping it focused on the business needs, because we were demoing things that we had been working on.
When you did that, did you also give a lot of context to why this mattered and what role it was in the bigger picture? Or was it like, look at this cool whizzy thing?
It was a bit of both. Yeah, there was definitely things that were just like, oh, hey, I think this is cool. I want to show you guys. And there was other things that was like, here's the business need. Here's how it meets it.
Okay, thank you.
One of the big tools that we used for training a lot of our administrators when we initially onboarded into Kubernetes was CoopCon, strangely. Showing people lots of links to different recorded presentations here was pretty invaluable for our admin team, although we did kind of have to point a gun to their head and say, sit down and watch this hour-long talk. Also sharing source code. All of our developers, all of our admins, all of our templates, we all contribute all of the manifests to a central repo where everyone can see everyone else's. And this kind of lets us evangelize, I guess, the things that best fit our needs so that our anyone can see at a moment what they might need to do like a stateful set deployment or something like that. And also kubectl explain. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with that, but it has been the most useful command for all of anybody who has a question of how do I do this, because it'll just tell you all the different parts of whatever object you're interested in seeing.
Did you spend a lot of time curating the links that you were sending out? Because there's so many. If you search for CNCF videos, I mean, from every level and every topic, that it can also be pretty overwhelming to just point somebody at them.
Oh yeah, I mean, we definitely don't point people and just say, hi, go to YouTube. But there's different topics for different items, like for resource request and limit setting. Tim Hawken had a great one at KubeCon 2016. Or for just the general architecture, there's a lot of good ones out there, so it does definitely need to be curated. But it's curated by the people who first started using the system and then need to evangelize that to the rest of the organization.
Yeah. Keep going.
Okay. One of the things that I liked from the point of the gentleman back there was this idea of unifying tools. One of the things that we did operationally that's really helped us as we matured is to decide that we were going to invest heavily in Prometheus within Kubernetes. And so we said every single thing we deploy as a platform component has to be monitored with Prometheus. So whether that's a sidecar or compiling something into the Docker image. And then when we made that same requirement for application development teams, we had a lot of patterns that were already developed, and we really built a community around Prometheus and Kubernetes, and kind of linked those things together, so that now it's like, okay, well, there's a number of strategies that we've done, we have a number of examples, and it's just another way that you can bring in kind of an expertise that might cross between admins and developers.
Just on the point of having a hard time getting developers interested in the videos that you link to them, one of the things that we've been doing for the last couple times in the last 6 months has been actually doing like microservice watch parties of either doing like over a lunch, like brown bag, or bringing in pizza or something, and basically just getting like a department or a group of people together to just watch that together, of just shoving it on like projector in your lunchroom or whatever, and then afterwards actually like sitting down and talking about like what does this mean for us as part of the talk.
I think there's still some.
Thanks. So actually coming from the data scientist perspective, so we start with the Docker image because we just don't want to use a VM, and then Kubernetes pop out to manage a multiple like API, a way to deploy it. So that was quite easy transition for us from Docker to Kubernetes, but I think it's really hard for a lot of new data scientists, where we require them to be a full-time, like full-stack data scientist, meaning that they also need to cover some of the deployment work. Then if they don't have the Docker experience, it becomes really hard for them. But right now we actually have the automated pipeline to do that. So really based on the experience, it's like, they say if you never use Docker, try with the Docker to replicate the VM solution. If you use Docker, then how do you try to replicate your Docker Compose with the Kubernetes? If you use Kubernetes before, then we're talking about how you restructure your kind of manual custom architecture and pipeline with the Kubernetes component. So that become very natural for us. And because we always have someone who is more experienced, then we also do something like lunch and learn to just share. But I think to the point that I feel the problem is not about onboarding for us. It's more about how we define a clear responsibility of ownership. Because after onboarding, people know about it, but who is maintaining what? Because as Kubernetes becomes so easy from training our model to deployment, and then we also have the pipeline, it becomes a little bit difficult to say, hey, who is taking care of what? It looks like the data scientist can take care of something, but the DevOps can also do something. And so when a request coming over, is like there's a lot of coordinations, and we just don't have a very clear sense. So the workflow can be good with someone who is pretty experienced, but can be chaotic when someone is less experienced.
Excellent point.
I just want to go back to when somebody was talking about, sending people links to videos and having a watch party. And I think the collaborative discussion of the content is great. I myself would be hesitant to send somebody a video and say, make sure you watch this because we're all going to sit around and talk about it. I know my preference is rather than watch a video, I'd rather read a transcript of what's in the video or even have a demo that I can go through myself. And so instead of sitting and watching a video for 20 minutes, actually sit down and do a curated demo, for example. So just, I would say if you have some media format that you want people to consume, make sure there are alternative formats and methods for them to get the same info, and then have the meeting and say, okay, I expect everybody either watched the video, read the transcript, did the exercises, listened to the audio in the car, whatever, now let's sit down and talk about it.
So in addition, you're saying like kind of maybe a hands-on tutorial session, or let's all do this together, or just out of band?
To or done, and then you discuss it like a talk club. Basically, yeah.
Okay.
So we had a lot of experience in this specific issue since we work with at least 30 university researchers, and the researchers could be something like who just their first coding project, they just finished their first coding project in MATLAB for solving some math problems to very early stage. And what we found helpful is to document exactly what they are working on or they're solving. So for instance, maybe all they need to do is run an image inside the Kubernetes. So we document, here's a template, you replace the image tag to something that you built locally. And another thing we found helpful is a lot of, the concepts in Docker are a lot more easier to than Kubernetes. So what we told our users is just run this in Docker, and then we created a document saying these commands translate to this in Kubernetes. And there's another perspective to this. We also have very experienced or power users or users who need power access to Kubernetes, or maybe we're bringing a new employee. In that case, what we found helpful is there is a project on GitHub called Kubernetes the Hard Way, and there's also a tutorial in Google Cloud that goes over some of the kubectl comment. So we just say, go through this documentation or Kubernetes the hard way, or go to the Google Cloud tutorial and follow the instructions. So those two are also helpful.
Excellent. Okay. I think we might be already at time. So thanks, everybody, for so many awesome ideas and discussion. So that was pretty much it. Thanks.